Quick question. Do you believe you would last one night in a medieval tavern? I bet you wouldn't. After a long day on a frozen, bandit-haunted road, a traveler might finally see it, a flicker of warm light in the twilight. The tavern. The mind fills with images of a crackling fireplace, a friendly host, a hot meal, and a mug of rich ale. It represented a moment of perceived safety in a brutal world. However, that was often the fantasy. The reality for many was that they had just traded the dangers of the road for a new set of challenges. In a real medieval tavern, the warmth could be illusory, the food a punishment, and the person smiling next to you might be assessing your worth. For many, this was not a refuge. It was simply a different kind of trap. Upon pushing open the heavy wooden door, the illusion would often shatter. The welcoming light seen from the road might be a single, sputtering fire pit in the center of the room. It was typically surrounded by a privileged few, hoarding the meager warmth like dragons on a pile of gold. For everyone else, there was only cold. The air itself was often the first assault. It wasn't just unpleasant, it was a physical presence, a thick, greasy fog that stung the eyes and caught in the throat, like breathing through a dirty, wet cloth. This was a toxic blend of smoke from whatever cheap fuel the innkeeper could find, be it damp wood, peat, or even dried dung. The ceiling and beams were often coated in a layer of sticky black soot that could flake off into the patrons' cups and bowls. The sour, yeasty smell of spilled, spoiled ale soaked into the dirt floor, the oppressive odor of dozens of unwashed bodies, and the faint, sweet smell of rot from garbage, questionable meat, and general decay. The noise was a dull, chaotic roar, not of merry minstrels, but of arguments and drunken slurs. A palpable tension often filled the air. This was not a sanctuary, but a microcosm of the brutal world one was trying to escape. The night had just begun, and already a traveler was fighting for the simple act of breathing clean air. With a throat raw from the road and the smoke, a drink was a desperate need. But in a medieval tavern, even quenching one's thirst was a gamble, like playing Russian roulette with your digestive system. Approaching the innkeeper and asking for water would likely be met with laughter. With no concept of germ theory, local water sources were often contaminated. Drinking it straight was a known risk for dysentery, typhoid, or cholera. This left ale and wine as the primary options. The ale, known as liquid bread, was a staple of the medieval diet, and the brewing process did kill many pathogens. But safe did not always mean good. The liquid inside a tankard was often cloudy, thick, and sour. To maximize profits, tavern keepers frequently used the cheapest, poorest quality grain. Worse, the ale was almost always watered down, turning a single barrel into the ghost of a proper brew. To mask the taste of spoiled ale or dilution, brewers and innkeepers might add other ingredients. Wine presented a greater opportunity for fraud. A tavern keeper could pass off cheap local wine as expensive French stock. More commonly, they would dilute good wine and attempt to bring back the flavor and color by adding spices, sloe berries, or even animal blood. Beyond the drink itself, the tavern was a center for gambling and scams. A friendly stranger might invite a traveler to a game of dice, but he and the innkeeper could be working together, using loaded dice or marked cards. Classic medieval cons, like the pig in a poke, were adapted for the tavern setting, where a charlatan might sell a fake relic or a useless miracle cure. Even paying was a risk. Coin clipping was a rampant problem, and an innkeeper might try to pass off clipped coins in a traveler's change, devaluing their purse without them even realizing it. In this place, every transaction was a potential swindle, poisoned not by a fast-acting toxin, but by greed and the grim economic reality of the age. A hot meal was a powerful dream on the road, but the food in a medieval tavern was often a significant threat. The heart of the culinary operation was frequently the perpetual stew or pottage pot. The concept was economical, a single batch of stew that was continuously fed but never truly fresh. As patrons were served, the innkeeper added more cheap and available ingredients, some vegetables, grain, and scraps of meat. This stew might have been simmering for days, its core ingredients breaking down into an unidentifiable mush. The first challenge was sanitation. With no health codes, the kitchen was likely a dark, smoky corner of the main room, crawling with pests. Utensils were rarely washed properly, and cooks worked in near darkness with unwashed hands. The ingredients themselves were a danger. Mold on grain could produce mycotoxins not destroyed by heat, and meat was the biggest gamble. Without refrigeration, any meat not heavily salted was in a state of decay. An innkeeper looking to save money would rarely throw away spoiled meat. Instead, it would be thrown into the pottage, its rancid taste masked by herbs or the other flavors in the pot. Due to the filthy environment, it was not unheard of for food to be contaminated with debris like animal hair, insects, or splinters. The act of eating was also a challenge. Utensils were a rarity for common folk who ate with their hands and used bread as a plate and sponge. While hand washing was a social custom, the water provided was often unclean, rendering the gesture meaningless. The food was sustenance, a defense against starvation, but it was a defense that came with its own silent, invisible risks. Having navigated the food and drink, a traveler then faced the most unpredictable danger: the other patrons. A medieval tavern was a social melting pot boiling over with desperation and greed. In one corner might sit a group of demobilized soldiers, men trained in violence with nothing to lose, like human landmines waiting for a wrong step. A dispute over dice could erupt into a brawl in an instant. Indeed, violence was a common feature of tavern life. A study of court records in medieval Dubrovnik, for instance, found that brawling accounted for a staggering 57% of all documented offenses in its taverns. Huddled closer to the fire might be merchants, their slightly better clothes marking them as targets for the cut purses who prowled the crowded room. There were also beggars, some genuinely in need, others running scams. A desperate man is a dangerous one. While taverns were overwhelmingly male-dominated spaces, women were not entirely absent. They were often present as alewives, servants, or to purchase drink to take home. But the violent atmosphere made it an unsafe environment for most to socialize in. The tavern also functioned as the internet of its day, a rumor mill where information traveled as fast as gossip. But this flow of information had a dark side. A loose tongue after too much ale could reveal a merchant's route or a politically sensitive opinion to spies and informants who were always listening. It was like leaving your front door wide open in a bad neighborhood. The very atmosphere was thick with a latent threat. Even the stables were dangerous. Poorly constructed and unheated, they were breeding grounds for disease, and the grooms were often in league with thieves. Losing one's horse could be a death sentence, leaving a traveler stranded and vulnerable. The reality of the medieval innkeeper was often grim. He was a ruthless businessman, and his tavern was his web. His survival frequently depended on his willingness to cheat and deceive his guests. His primary motivation was profit. We have seen how he might water down ale or serve questionable food, but his deceptions could run deeper. He was sometimes the ringleader of the tavern's criminal ecosystem, splitting winnings with a crooked gambler or taking a cut from a thief's score in exchange for turning a blind eye. Innkeepers were legally responsible for their guests' property, but this created a perverse incentive. It was like making a fox the guard of a henhouse and then being surprised when chickens go missing. Instead of ensuring safety, some innkeepers took part in the crime themselves, arranging robberies or colluding with local bandits. Pricing was arbitrary. A traveler who looked wealthy or naive would be charged an exorbitant price. Some of the most terrifying stories from the period involve innkeepers who graduated from fraud to murder. Legends like that of Sawney Bean, while folkloric, reflect a genuine fear. A traveler, alone and far from home, was incredibly vulnerable. If they disappeared from a remote inn, who would investigate? The innkeeper was the gatekeeper, and his establishment could be the deadliest trap on the road. Exhausted, a traveler's only wish was for sleep. Forgetting any notion of a private room, what awaited most was the great chamber or common sleeping room. For the poorest, this meant a spot on the floor, on rushes that were rarely changed and became a living carpet of filth, fleas, and lice. Those more fortunate might secure a place in a communal bed, shared with 3, 4, or more complete strangers. It was less like a bed and more like a human sardine can. One would lie down fully clothed, pressed against the unwashed bodies of other men. The sensory assault became unavoidable. The room was a hotbed for disease. Parasites like lice and fleas spread easily, as did infectious diseases like typhoid. However, the most immediate threat was theft and violence. Asleep, a traveler was at their most vulnerable, like a ship docking in a pirate cove for the night. A thief in the same bed could silently go through their pockets. True rest was nearly impossible. This was not shelter, it was a gauntlet. The first hint of gray light was the signal to leave. The traveler would awaken, not refreshed, but from a shallow, paranoid slumber. A frantic check of the purse. If it was still there, they were lucky. The room was littered with sleeping forms, the fire reduced to embers. The only goal was to get out. One would gather their belongings silently, nod curtly to the innkeeper, and push the heavy door open. The morning air, shockingly cold but clean, felt like a purification. As the traveler led their horse onto the muddy road, they might look back at the tavern. In the harsh light of day, it was revealed for what it was, a filthy, dilapidated structure. The road ahead was still dangerous, but turning one's back on the tavern felt like a victory, like surviving a shipwreck. The traveler was colder, poorer, and possibly sicker. They hadn't rested, they had endured. The medieval tavern lives in our imagination as a place of refuge and revelry, but the reality we have journeyed through is far darker. The tavern wasn't a lighthouse in a storm, it was the eye of the hurricane, a brief, deceptive calm surrounded by chaos. It was a concentration of all the world's dangers, filth, and desperation under a single, soot-stained roof. The warmth was an illusion, the food a punishment, the drink a gamble, and the company a threat. It was a place where survival depended on constant, exhausting vigilance. The tavern was a mirror of the medieval age itself. Life was cheap, trust was a fatal mistake, and true safety was a luxury that no amount of coin could buy. It had 4 walls and a roof, but those walls often concealed more dangers than they kept out. The next time we see a hero walk into a cozy inn in a fantasy story, we should remember the historical reality. The greatest risk was not the dagger in the dark, but the simple, hopeful act of walking through the door. Let me know in the comments if you truly believe you would last a night in a medieval tavern.